So this past Wednesday night was sort of the hinge between the series that we just finished and the new direction that we're going the month of November for me. Last Sunday, we finished the Jesus Remix series. We had a wonderful time of witness, hearing from our volunteers and mission teams that have been out doing work in the world on behalf of this church and on behalf of Christ. We focused last week on Jesus as the servant, but we had spent all fall looking at all of these names for Jesus, these descriptions of Jesus. And so on Wednesday night, we got to wrap up the class that I was teaching alongside of this using the book Freeing Jesus. And I have to say that that group really came together. It was a group of people from all different sectors of this church. Some people who have been here for a long time, others who were pretty new, and everything in between. And there was so much honesty and openness in our conversation. And this past Wednesday night in the parlor, there was holy ground as we shared not just our ideas about Jesus, but we talked about our relationship with Jesus and how that has grown and changed and evolved, and even evolved over this fall as we've been talking and listening to each other. And it was holy space indeed. And so I was in a good mood leaving the church about 8:30 and driving, but I was already thinking toward this Sunday and already thinking toward where we were going for the next 4 weeks. And wouldn't you know it, but God was listening to my unspoken prayers. And so as I drove back to Annapolis, I heard a wonderful story with some direct ties to today's scripture. Let me see if I can, there we are. Adam Elliott was being interviewed. He is an Australian filmmaker, and he's a little bit of a dinosaur in the sense that he's using a very old technology in a world of CGI graphics and a world of artificial intelligence, a world of all the digitization of filmmaking. He is using a technique called stop motion filming or claymation. Now, if you don't know what that is, just think back to 1964 and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. So you've seen the technique before. It is painstakingly slow. You make every little character, you move them little by little, frame by frame, so that there's an appearance of motion as they are making their way through that story. Here is a picture from the set of that original Rudolph as Santa obviously is flying up in the sky, but every scene, every detail, every little nuance, just a tweak here and a twist here, frame by frame by frame. It's a slow process in a fast world these days. And so he's making a new film called Memoir of a Snail. He makes these films that are sort of quirky. He loves the underdog. He loves to look out and lift up those who have been pushed to the side or maybe underestimated or maybe neglected or even bullied. And so this film is called, I haven't seen it, but it's out there, Memoir of a Snail, and he was talking about it and talking about why he loves to work in this slow, laborious way. He talked about the fact that even though this film will require 135,000 separate scenes that will be filmed one by one by one by one, and over 700 different backdrops, and all of these different characters have been created by the artists and the prop makers, and it's a film that has taken 8 years to make. He loves that because he loves the way that art unfolds slowly and imperfectly. He loves the fact that the clay, in the words of the interview, shows the fingerprints, shows the cracks a little bit here and there. As a matter of fact, if sometimes people, his prop makers, would bring him a piece for the film, and it would be a little too perfect, and he would say, "Go scuff it up a little bit," or "Drop it on the floor once or twice." You see, Adam Elliott had been living with his own imperfect life. As an artist, he has an inherited condition where he has a tremor that he can't shake, and he's not in control of it. It comes and it goes. And so as an artist, you can imagine that's challenging with a hand that might shake a bit. And so he says his lines aren't always straight, and his circles sometimes look more like ovals. But he's learned to embrace his very human nature, right? Being made of clay, so to speak, himself. And he's made it a part of his own aesthetic, and he works it into his films as well. He was reflecting upon that. He said, we're all a little broken at times, and I'm just trying to reflect that in blobs of clay. And when the interviewer concluded the interview, she put this wonderful tagline on this rich conversation that I'd been listening to all the way home: blobs of clay with all their beautiful imperfections. Blobs of clay with all their beautiful imperfections. Now, Sarah Birnbaum could just as easily have been interviewing the Apostle Paul. Wouldn't have to be this Australian filmmaker, because the Apostle Paul uses a similar image in the second letter to the Corinthians. Paul, in this letter, has some issues to take up with the Corinthians. It's all not happy. He has some things he wants to tell them, and he wants to tell them rather strongly, but he also wants to build them up in the process and remind them that they are bearers of God's light, that they hold treasure in clay jars. And so he tells them this. He reminds them it's God's mercy that engages us in this ministry. It is God who says, let light shine out of darkness, and who's shown in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of Jesus Christ, right? For we have this treasure in clay jars, he says. Imperfect vessels. Things with their own scuffs that have been fallen to the ground a time or two. So that it might be clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us. So when we get to bear the light of Christ, when we get to bear the light of God in the world, it's not because we're perfect. We are, in fact, God's very imperfect vessels of clay, like clay jars that hold treasure nonetheless. He says we need to be reminded of that because life will not always be easy, and in fact, we will bear many scars. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in us, in the body, the death of Jesus, and at the same time, the life of Jesus. We are mortal creatures. We carry with us all the time the death of Jesus, but also the hope of the life and the resurrection of Jesus. And on this day, when we honor and remember these saints, these imperfect people, saints with a small s, not the capital S, the canonized saints of the church, but these were the saints in our lives, the ones that Paul uses to address all Christians. That word, that rich word, God's holy ones. We are God's holy ones, carrying with us the death of Jesus and the life of Jesus in us too. This is a day when those things commingle at this table, when those things commingle in our hearts as well. For while we live, we are always being given up to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may be made visible in our mortal flesh. We're carrying with us both the life and the death of Jesus, the life of Jesus being made visible in our clay jars, our mortal flesh. No, these were not perfect people. You know that, especially those of you who knew these people well, right? If they were your loved one, your father, your mother, your spouse, you know that they had their quirks and the things that drove you crazy, but now you miss like crazy. Their own habits, their own way of being in the world that you will hold on to. They were the things that made them human. They're things that made them real. Not perfect saints of God. Those perfect people are hard to relate to, aren't they? The perfect people and the perfect personas that we see online, they're imaginary. The kind of people that can bear the light of God, the kind of people that can bring into the world the life and the death of Jesus, the witness of Christ, they're the ones that are authentic and real. They let you see the scars and the cracks and the real life and the real stories. Barb Morris in her book says, our cracks and broken places, in fact, they are where our light shines through most brightly into the dark. When we embrace our humanity, when we don't run from it, we don't hide from it, that we don't have perfect lives, and neither did these saints. And yet, The mystery and the amazing privileges we get to bear the light of Christ anyway. Nevertheless, we do it imperfectly. We don't do it every single day the way we want to, and yet God still trusts clay jars to bring God's light and witness into the world. Now, the songwriter Leonard Cohen also reminds us that that light not only comes out from us, but it's also the cracks. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in as well. So when we are sitting at a bedside with someone that we love in those last days and weeks, it's hard. But sometimes that's where the light gets in. When we are going through a difficult time of decision or uncertainty, and we are at our wits' end and we have nothing more to offer, we don't know what the next day is going to hold. Sometimes in our weakness, that's where the light comes in most powerfully. And we get to experience God's grace in a new and unexpected way. I was talking to a friend and a colleague this week, going through a really difficult family situation right now. And he said to me, I don't know where God is in this. I keep asking, I keep looking. And my prayer for my friend is that that light will creep in and make its way known. And that's their prayer too. They're praying for a way in and through this with the presence of God. That's how the light gets in. Now, we threw you off a little bit with our hymn this morning, yes? If you were following in your hymnal, sorry we didn't give you better instructions. My fault for not putting a little note in the bulletin. I think we did last year. But I discovered this other great hymn that goes with the great hymn of the church for all the saints. And it's meant to be sung on this day. It's also a hymn about the saints. It goes with the same tune as that. And so we merged these two together. And in verse 2, if you were following in the hymnal, you said, no, that's not what's here. But you saw different words on the screen. Give thanks for those who made their life a light caught from the Christ's flame bursting through the night. Isn't that a wonderful way to think about the saints? These are people who made their life a light caught from the Christ flame. Someday when my picture is on some altar, I hope it will be somewhere, I hope they say that there was a life, a light caught from the Christ's flame. And wouldn't it be wonderful if people could say that about you too, that they could see the witness in you of Christ, a light not of our own making. We don't generate the light, we just catch it from the Christ's flame. And then in that third verse that we sang, and for our own, our living, and our dead, thanks for the love by which our life is fed, a love not changed by time or death or dread. That's the affirmation of All Saints Sunday. That's the affirmation of coming together at this table where we break bread and share the cup and we say that Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. We say that we feast with all the communion of God's saints, both those who've gone before us, those who are here now, and those who will come after us, mystically bound together, a love not changed by time or death or dread. If you are saying goodbye to someone special this year, that love does not have to be let go of. That love can carry you and sustain you and be with you even though that person may no longer be here with you. And the only thing to say about that is, Alleluia, Alleluia, the refrain. Coming back to our filmmaking for just a moment. Every single one of our lives is like that film, The Memoir of the Snail. In that, every one of us measures our lives in moments and hours and days and weeks and months and seasons and years. Every single one of those frames matters. Every single one of those frames is part of the narrative. Some of those days and frames are big and monumental. The day you get married, the day you discover what you want to do with your life, the day that you have a child. Some of those frames burst with life. The day that you just wake up and everything is good and going well. And there are frames where it's hard. where you're struggling, or someone around you is struggling, where you're sick, somebody around you is sick, where you're mourning, or whether you are wondering for a way through. And then in between, there are a whole bunch of ordinary frames, aren't there? Just days that we just like moves into another day and another day and another day. And all of those frames, when the camera pans over all those frames, that's how we make a life. As these blobs of clay, day by day, angle by angle, scuffed up and not. These beautiful blobs of clay that from the beginning, remember that Genesis story where God lifted the earth, the clay of the earth, and formed human beings out of that clay and breathed life into them? That's what Paul is echoing here. We have this treasure in clay jars. We are made of the stuff of clay ourselves and made holy by the breath of God in us. And so is everybody else around you. And so there really aren't any ordinary frames, are there? Every day is extraordinary because every day is a chance to bump up against the sacred and the sacred lives of those around you, including your own. The sacred lives of these saints, and to know that you, even you don't just carry treasure in a clay jar. You are a treasure in a clay jar. Thanks be to God. Amen.